We often think of medieval bread as rough, tasteless peasant food, barely fit for survival. But what if I told you that medieval bakers actually mastered techniques that create bread with longer shelf life, better nutrition, and more complex flavors than anything you'll find in a modern supermarket? Without commercial yeast, industrial mills, or preservatives, they developed systems that kept entire communities fed through winters, famines, and sieges. In this video, you'll discover 7 forgotten medieval bread-making methods that have been lost to time. Techniques so effective, they could revolutionize your baking today. And at the end, a surprising truth about why we abandoned bread that was actually better for us. Before we dive in, let me ask you something. Have you ever made a loaf of bread from scratch only to watch it go stale or moldy within days? Or bought sourdough from an artisan bakery and wondered why it never quite tastes like the real thing? That's because we've lost the foundational knowledge that medieval bakers considered essential. If you've ever been frustrated by modern bread that's either full of chemicals or spoils immediately, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm to share this with others who care about real food. Now, let's uncover what history has been hiding. Number 1. Maslin bread, the survival loaf that never failed. Today we think of bread as either wheat or rye, white or whole grain. Medieval people understood something we've forgotten. Mixing grains wasn't about making do with limited resources. It was deliberate food science that created bread superior to single-grain loaves in almost every measurable way. Maslin bread combined wheat and rye in ratios that varied by season, region, and availability, usually somewhere between 60-40 and 50-50. The genius wasn't just in mixing the grains, it was understanding how they complemented each other at a molecular level. Wheat provided gluten structure and rise. Rye contributed enzymes that kept the bread moist for weeks and acids that prevented mold. Together they created a loaf that modern food scientists are only now beginning to appreciate. A study from the University of Helsinki in 2018 analysed reconstructed medieval Maslin recipes. They found that the mixed grain breads retained moisture 40% longer than pure wheat bread and resisted mold growth for up to 3 times longer than modern whole wheat loaves. Even more remarkable, the mixed grains created a more complete amino acid profile, essentially making the bread nutritionally superior. Medieval bakers didn't need lab analysis. They knew from generations of observation that a family could survive on Maslin bread and root vegetables through an entire winter. Pure wheat bread, for all its prestige, would go stale in days. For folks like us who remember when food actually lasted without a freezer, this is the bread our great-grandfathers would recognize. Dense, substantial, and built to sustain hard work. The loaf that didn't quit on you. Modern bakers chase artisan wheat loaves that cost $7 and go stale by evening. Medieval bakers created mixed grain bread that cost less, lasted longer, and kept working men fed. That's not primitive, that's engineering. Number 2, trencher bread, the edible plate system. Here's something that'll change how you think about medieval dining. They didn't just bake bread to eat, they baked plates you could eat after the meal. Trencher bread was a thick, flat loaf made from older grains, baked specifically to be dense and absorbent. It served as your plate throughout the meal, soaking up juices, gravies, and sauces. By the end of the feast, the bread had become a gravy-soaked, flavor-packed item that was either eaten by the diner or given to the poor. Zero waste, maximum efficiency. But here's what makes it brilliant from a food preservation standpoint. Trencher bread was made from day-old dough or older grain that was past its prime for standard bread making. Nothing was wasted. The bread was deliberately under-risen and over-baked to create maximum density and absorbency. This wasn't just clever. It was a complete system that transformed potential food waste into a functional dining tool. The baking process involved very little water, heavy pressure during shaping, and long, slow baking at moderate temperatures. The result was bread that could sit out for days without spoiling, could hold hot food without falling apart, and actually improved in flavor as it absorbed the meal it carried. For modern homesteaders or anyone cooking over fire, Trencher bread offers something remarkable. A plate that never needs washing, food waste that feeds someone rather than a landfill, and bread made from ingredients you'd otherwise compost. English manor records from the 1300s show that large households baked trenchers in batches of hundreds, storing them for weeks without refrigeration. When modern archaeologists reconstructed the recipes and techniques, they found the bread remained structurally sound and edible for over 30 days at room temperature. Compare that to your average sandwich bread that molds in 5 days, even with preservatives. Number 3. Twice-baked ship's bread, the eternal loaf. Sailors in the medieval period faced a problem that would stump modern bakers. How do you create bread that survives months at sea in damp, rat-infested holds without refrigeration, preservatives, or even airtight containers? Their answer was twice-baked bread, and it's a technique that created what might be the longest-lasting bread in human history. The process began with a standard dough, usually wheat or barley, mixed with minimal water to create an extremely stiff consistency. This dough was shaped into flat cakes or thick biscuits and baked once until fully cooked. Then came the key step. The bread was cooled completely and baked again at a lower temperature for several hours, sometimes even a third time. This drove out virtually all remaining moisture, creating bread that was rock hard but essentially immortal. Maritime records from Venetian and Genoese trading ships document ship's bread remaining edible for over a year. Portuguese sailors on voyages to India carried bread that was baked before departure and still consumed 6 months later after crossing the equator twice. The secret was understanding moisture as the enemy. Every pathogen, every mold, every form of decay requires water. Remove the water completely and bread becomes inert. Medieval bakers discovered that twice-baked bread, when stored in dry conditions, could outlast the voyage, outlast the sailor, and still be fit to eat. For modern preppers focused on long-term food storage without electricity or fancy dehydrators, this method offers something profound. Bread that lasts not days or weeks but seasons. The technique requires nothing but time, heat, and patience. When you needed to eat it, you dunk it in wine, beer, stew, or water to rehydrate. The bread would soften, absorb the liquid's flavour, and become a meal again. No waste, no spoilage. Just bread that refused to quit. Number 4. Rye and honey medicinal bread, the pharmacy loaf. Walk into any medieval monastery infirmary, and you'd find something that modern medicine has almost completely abandoned. Bread baked specifically for healing. Not as a delivery method for medicine, but as medicine itself. Rye and honey bread combined 2 ingredients that medieval physicians understood had powerful antimicrobial and digestive properties. Rye contains compounds that modern research has confirmed reduce inflammation and support gut health. Honey, especially raw honey, is a proven antibacterial agent that inhibits the growth of harmful bacteria while promoting beneficial ones. But the real genius was in how they were combined through fermentation. Medieval medicinal bread used a long, slow fermentation process, sometimes lasting 3 to 5 days. This allowed naturally occurring lactobacilli to break down the rye's complex starches and create lactic acid, which further enhanced preservation and digestibility. The honey was added late in the process to preserve its antimicrobial properties, which are destroyed by high heat. Monastery records from the 1200s describe specific recipes for ailments. Bread for digestive complaints used extra honey and fennel seeds. Bread for respiratory issues included ground herbs like thyme and horehound mixed into the dough. Bread for wound recovery was exceptionally dense and rich, designed to sustain patients who couldn't eat solid food. A 2015 study from the University of Hohenheim in Germany analysed medieval rye honey bread recipes. They found that the fermentation process created compounds with measurable anti-inflammatory effects, and that the bread supported healthy gut bacteria better than modern whole wheat bread. For folks with digestive issues that doctors just throw pills at, this is worth paying attention to. Medieval bakers created bread that didn't just feed you. It helped your body function better. The fermentation broke down compounds that cause bloating and discomfort. The honey provided sustained energy without blood sugar spikes. The rye delivered fiber and nutrients in a form your gut could actually process. Number 5. Acorn and chestnut forest bread, the famine insurance. Here's a bread that saved entire populations during crop failures, yet modern bakers treat the ingredients like they're inedible. When wheat and rye harvests failed, medieval communities turned to the forest. Acorns and chestnuts became flour, and the bread made from them kept people alive when grain-based bread was impossible. Acorn bread required knowledge that's almost extinct today. Raw acorns contain bitter tannins that are toxic in large quantities. Medieval people developed a leaching process that removed the tannins while preserving the nut's nutritional value. Acorns were shelled, ground coarse, and soaked in running water for days, sometimes weeks. The water was changed repeatedly until the bitterness disappeared. The resulting acorn meal was dried, ground fine, and mixed with whatever grain was available, usually in a 30-70 ratio. Chestnut bread was simpler, but required different techniques. Chestnuts were dried, ground into flour, and created a bread that was naturally sweet, dense, and remarkably filling. The high starch content meant chestnut bread could be made with minimal grain, stretching limited wheat or barley supplies. Italian mountain communities, especially in Tuscany and Corsica, maintained chestnut bread traditions into the 20th century. Elderly villagers interviewed in the 1970s recalled their grandparents describing chestnut bread as superior to grain bread for sustained energy during long days of physical labor. Modern nutritional analysis proves they were right. Acorn flour is high in protein, healthy fats, and minerals that are scarce in grain-based bread. Chestnut flour provides complex carbohydrates that release energy slowly, preventing the crash you get from modern white bread. Together or separately, these forest breads offer something that should matter to everyone watching this: food security that doesn't depend on agriculture, supply chains, or grocery stores. Knowledge that could mean the difference between hunger and survival if the systems we rely on ever fail. Number 6. Ale balm bread, the original sourdough. Before commercial yeast, before even traditional sourdough starters, medieval bakers had a secret weapon: ale balm, the foam skimmed from fermenting beer. Every village had a brewery. Every brewery produced balm. And every baker knew that this frothy byproduct was the key to bread that rose predictably, tasted complex, and lasted longer than bread made with simple wild fermentation. Ale balm wasn't just convenient. It was a superior leavening agent because it combined the benefits of cultured yeast with the natural preservatives found in hops and barley. The process was simple, but required timing. When ale was actively fermenting, usually 12 to 24 hours after brewing began, thick foam would rise to the surface. This foam contained millions of active yeast cells, already fed and multiplying. Bakers would skim this balm, mix it with flour and water, and have dough rising within hours instead of the days required for wild yeast starters. But here's what made ale balm bread special. The hops used in brewing have natural antimicrobial properties. These compounds transferred to the balm and then into the bread, creating a loaf that resisted mold significantly longer than bread made with other leavening methods. English baking records from the 1500s describe ale balm bread remaining fresh for a week or more, even in damp conditions that would ruin other breads within days. The flavour was distinctly different from modern bread. Slightly malty, with a complexity that came from the barley and hops, and a texture that was both light and substantial. For modern bakers, frustrated with the unpredictability of sourdough starters, ale balm offers a forgotten alternative. If you brew beer, you're literally throwing away perfect bread yeast every batch. Medieval bakers understood that brewing and baking weren't separate crafts. They were two parts of a complete food system, where nothing was wasted and everything served multiple purposes. Number 7. Salt preserved dough, the perpetual starter. Here's the technique that might be the most practical for modern bakers, yet almost nobody knows it exists. Medieval bakers didn't maintain sourdough starters the way we do today, feeding them daily and keeping them alive through constant attention. They preserved dough itself with salt, creating a leavening culture that could be stored for months and reactivated when needed. The process involved taking a portion of successfully risen dough, mixing it with a significant amount of salt, and storing it in a cool, dark place. The salt prevented the dough from fermenting out of control or spoiling, essentially putting the yeast into hibernation. When you needed to bake, you'd take a piece of this salt-preserved dough, rinse off the excess salt, mix it with fresh flour and water, and let it rise. The yeast would wake up, and within hours you'd have risen dough ready to bake. Monastery baking records describe this technique as standard practice. A monastery might bake bread only twice a week, but the dough culture never died because it was preserved between baking days. Some records suggest that certain monastery bakeries maintained the same dough line for decades, passed from baker to baker, creating bread with a consistent flavour and character that became part of the monastery's identity. Modern bakers who've reconstructed this technique report that salt-preserved dough creates bread with exceptional flavour depth. The extended preservation time allows enzymes to break down complex starches, creating sweetness and complexity that you can't achieve with quick-rise methods. Before commercial yeast, before even traditional sourdough starters, medieval bakers had a secret weapon. Make dough when you have time. Preserve it. Use it when you need it. No daily feeding, no guilt when you forget. Just bread making that fits your schedule, not the other way around. But here's the deeper truth that connects all of these methods. Medieval bakers understood bread as part of a complete system, not an isolated product. Bread connected to brewing. Bread connected to forest management. Bread connected to medicine. Bread connected to community welfare. Every technique we've covered today represents knowledge that took generations to develop and minutes to abandon when industrial baking promised convenience. We traded resilience for speed. We traded nutrition for shelf-stable packaging. We traded food that sustained hard-working peasants through brutal winters for bread that's 30% air and 40% preservatives. The question isn't whether medieval bread was better. The evidence is overwhelming that in most ways that actually matter, it was. The question is whether we're willing to relearn what we've lost. If you're tired of bread that fails you, if you're ready to learn techniques that actually work, hit that subscribe button. We're going deep on forgotten food knowledge every week. Drop a comment and tell me which of these 7 breads you're going to try first. I read every single one. This isn't just about baking, it's about reclaiming the skills that made men self-sufficient. Skills that didn't depend on factories, supply chains, or corporations telling you what to eat. Medieval bakers knew something we're only now remembering. Real bread doesn't need an ingredient list you can't pronounce. It needs knowledge, time, and respect for the craft. That's what we're bringing back.